The wind howled through the ruins, carrying the scent of old stone and forgotten stories. Calum pulled his cloak tighter around his shoulders as he made his way through the crumbling corridors of what had once been a great kingdom. The kingdom of Eldoria, a name barely spoken anymore, swallowed by time and myth. Legend said the last ruler, the Hollow King, had vanished without a trace. His kingdom, once prosperous, had fallen into ruin overnight. No one knew why. No one dared to return. Yet here, Calum was. He hadn't planned on coming here. In truth, he didn't remember how he had arrived. One moment, he had been traveling through the valley, and the next, he had found himself standing before these ruins, as if something had guided him here. His boots crunched against the gravel as he entered what seemed to be an old library. Most of the shelves had collapsed, the books long turned to dust. Only one thing remained intact, a single pedestal at the center of the room. Upon it lay an aged parchment, sealed with black wax. Calum hesitated before reaching for it. The wax crumbled at his touch, and the parchment unfurled itself as if it had been waiting for him. His heart pounded as he read the first line. To the one who seeks what was lost, solve my riddle and find the truth. The signature at the bottom made his breath catch. The Hollow King. Calum's fingers tightened around the parchment. This was no ordinary ruin. It was a trap, a test, or a warning. And something told him that turning back was no longer an option. Calum's grip on the parchment tightened. The ink, though faded, still carried a sense of urgency, as if it had been written just moments ago. His eyes traced the riddle beneath the Hollow King's signature. In silence, I ruled, though my throne was never mine. In shadow, I wait, though my hands once held the divine. Seek the place where echoes die, where whispers fade to dust. There you'll find what once was lost. Restore it if you must. A chill crawled up Calum's spine. The words tugged at something deep in his mind, something just out of reach. A memory? He took a slow breath, reading the lines again. Seek the place where echoes die. What did that mean? He turned in a slow circle, surveying the ruined library. The air was heavy with the weight of history, the forgotten words of thousands lingering in the dust. But there was nothing here that seemed to match the riddle. Then his gaze landed on something he hadn't noticed before, a carving on the wall. It was faint, nearly lost beneath layers of dirt and erosion, but he could just make out the shape. A crown, broken in half, a symbol of the Hollow King. Calum's fingers brushed against the stone, tracing the lines. As he did, a small section of the wall shifted inward with a low, grating sound. His pulse quickened. A hidden passage. Slowly, he stepped forward, pushing against the stone. A gust of air rushed past him as the entrance yawned open, revealing a staircase spiraling downward into darkness. Calum swallowed hard. The riddle had spoken of a place where echoes die. A crypt? A tomb? The only way to know was to descend. Steeling himself, he took the first step down. The cold swallowed him immediately. With each step, the air grew thicker, heavier, quieter. The sound of his boots against the stone faded, as if the world itself was being muffled. By the time he reached the bottom, there was no sound at all, not even his own breath. It was an unnatural silence, one that made his skin prickle. He lifted his torch, the flickering light casting eerie shadows along the corridor. Then he saw it, another inscription carved into the stone ahead. Your voice will not save you here. Only the truth will open the way. Calum exhaled sharply. He could feel it now, the weight of something watching, waiting. This was the first test, and he had no choice but to face it. Calum stared at the inscription, his fingers instinctively tightening around the parchment. Your voice will not save you here. Only the truth will open the way. The air in the underground chamber was unnaturally still. Even the flickering of his torch felt muted, as if the silence itself were swallowing sound before it could fully exist. He tested the weight of his own breath. No echo. This was the place where echoes die. He was in the right place. But what now? Calum turned his attention to the walls, scanning for clues. The stone was covered in more carvings, some weathered beyond recognition, but others remained clear. Symbols of kings and thrones, of battles fought and crowns broken. And there, near the floor, a single indentation. It was the shape of a hand. Calum hesitated. The riddle had mentioned restoring what was lost. Did that mean him? Or something else? His heart pounded as he crouched down and slowly pressed his palm into the indentation. At first, nothing happened. Then, a deep rumbling filled the chamber, shaking the very ground beneath him. The stone ahead of him split apart, revealing a hidden alcove. Inside, resting on a pedestal, was an iron key. Calum exhaled shakily. This was the first piece, the first key. But before he could move, the chamber suddenly grew colder. A shiver crawled up his spine. Then, from the darkness beyond the alcove, something shifted. A shadow moved. Calum didn't breathe. He barely blinked. Then he saw them. Two glowing eyes, watching him, waiting. And for the first time since he had entered this cursed kingdom, he was not alone. Calum's fingers hovered over the iron key. His breath held tight in his chest. The eyes in the darkness didn't blink. They simply watched. His torch trembled in his grip, casting unsteady light across the alcove. The shadow behind the eyes shifted. Tall, humanoid, yet wrong. Its form flickered, like smoke trying to take shape but never quite succeeding. Then a whisper filled the chamber. "You are not the first." The voice didn't echo. It sank into the air like it had always belonged there, carried by the stillness itself. Calum swallowed hard. "Who are you?" The whispering thing tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" it repeated. Calum clenched his jaw. He had no time for riddles. Ignoring the cold tendrils of fear snaking through his body, he reached forward and grabbed the iron key from the pedestal. The moment his fingers wrapped around it, the chamber groaned. The whispering multiplied. The walls, the very stone around him, began to speak. Lost kings, forgotten thrones, echoes swallowed whole. The riddle binds, the riddle breaks, a kingdom hollow, a king undone. The whispers grew louder. The voices overlapped, merging into one, until suddenly they stopped. Silence. Then a single voice clear as ice. "You have taken the first key. Will you take the throne?" Calum's blood ran cold. The hollow king's throne. The one that had been left empty. The riddle had never been just a puzzle to solve. It was a trap, a choice. His grip tightened around the key. He forced himself to breathe, to think. Whatever had happened to this kingdom, whatever had happened to the Hollow King, it hadn't been natural, and now the same fate was waiting for him. Calum turned on his heel, torch in one hand, key in the other. The whispering followed him as he ran. "You will return. They always return. The Hollow King waits." Calum didn't stop. He didn't dare look back. The whispers would not have him today. Calum sprinted up the stone passage, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers clung to him, crawling up his spine like unseen fingers, but the moment he crossed the threshold back into the ruins, they stopped. Silence. He exhaled sharply, bracing himself against the cold stone wall. His pulse still pounded, the weight of the key in his hand reminding him of the choice now before him. "Will you take the throne?" The words echoed in his mind. And though he had no intention of claiming a cursed kingdom, something deep inside him whispered that he was already caught in the riddle's web. His gaze fell on the ruins before him, the bones of a forgotten empire. At its heart, barely visible through the mist, lay the remains of the throne room. He had to go there. He didn't know why. But the answer, the next piece of the puzzle, was waiting. The throne room was in ruins. Massive stone pillars lay broken across the marble floor. The ceiling long collapsed, exposing the sky. And yet, in the center of the destruction, the throne still stood, untouched. Calum stepped forward cautiously, his boots crunching over shattered tile. The throne was made of obsidian, its surface smooth and unmarked despite the centuries. But as he approached, something shifted. The air grew heavier. A pressure settled over his chest, like unseen hands pressing down. Then, a voice. Not a whisper this time. A deep, resonant voice, as if it had been waiting for him. "You have come to take what was lost." Calem's breath hitched. He spun around. No one was there. He turned back to the throne, and someone was sitting in it. His blood turned to ice. A figure in dark robes, its face obscured by shadow. But Calem could feel its gaze on him, something ancient and hollow staring through him. His fingers tightened around the iron key. "Who are you?" A pause. Then, "I am what remains." Calem's skin prickled. The Hollow King. He had found him. Or rather, the Hollow King had been waiting for him. And now, Calem realized with dread, he might not be allowed to leave. Calem's breath came slow and shallow. The Hollow King did not move. He sat upon the obsidian throne, his dark robes blending into the shadows, making him seem like an extension of the ruined kingdom itself. Yet, even without a face, Calem could feel his gaze. He forced himself to speak. "You left behind a riddle." His voice was hoarse, uncertain. "I solved it. Now tell me, what am I supposed to restore?" The Hollow King's head tilted ever so slightly. Then, in a voice that echoed inside Calem's skull, he spoke. "You already know the answer." Calem's fingers clenched around the iron key. He had spent his entire life searching for meaning, piecing together forgotten histories, chasing after myths. But this wasn't just a myth. It was his own story. A cold realization crept into his mind. His missing memories. The strange pull toward this place. The whispers calling him back. He looked down at the key in his hand. It wasn't meant to unlock a door. It was meant to unlock him. His throat tightened. "What happened to you?" he asked. "To this kingdom?" The Hollow King finally stood. The air around him rippled, as if the very fabric of reality was straining against his presence. "We were forgotten," he said simply, "as you were." A sharp pulse struck through Calem's mind, a memory surfacing. He gasped, clutching his head as the world shifted. Flash. A grand hall filled with light, a golden throne, a crown resting in Calem's hands. The voice of an advisor whispering urgently, "The kingdom is crumbling. We must act before—" The walls shattered, a dark force, an all-consuming void, swallowing the palace whole. The screams of his people fading into silence. And then, nothing. Calem staggered back into the present. His chest rose and fell in uneven gasps. He looked up at the Hollow King. Not a stranger, not a legend, but a reflection. His own reflection. The truth crashed down like a tidal wave. He had been the Hollow King, and he had chosen to forget. The riddle had never been about solving a mystery. It had been about facing himself. The Hollow King took a slow step forward. "Now you must choose." Calem swallowed hard. The final verse of the riddle whispered in his mind, "Restore it, if you must." Calem stood frozen, the weight of the revelation crushing him. He had not discovered the Hollow King's fate. He had lived it. The echoes, the ruins, the forgotten throne, they were all remnants of his own mistakes. He had ruled this kingdom once, and when it began to crumble, he had chosen to erase himself, to vanish rather than face what he had lost. His grip on the iron key tightened. The Hollow King, his reflection, his past self, watched him with eerie patience. "Now you must choose." The words hung in the cold air between them. Calem forced himself to speak. "What happens if I leave?" The Hollow King tilted his head slightly. "You will forget." Again. The words hit like a blow to the chest. If he left, if he turned away, he would return to a life without memories, without purpose, wandering, searching, never knowing why he felt so empty. The truth would be buried. The kingdom would remain lost. But if he stayed... Calem swallowed hard. "And if I stay?" The Hollow King stepped closer. The space around him bent, warped, as if time itself was folding inward. "Then you will finish what you started." Calem glanced at the throne. His throne. The weight of responsibility pressed against him. To reclaim his past meant reclaiming everything, his mistakes, his failures, the kingdom he had abandoned. Could he do that? A deep, ancient groan rumbled through the ruins. The kingdom was waiting. And it would not wait much longer. He had to decide. Now. The ruins trembled. The weight of time itself pressed in around Calum, urging him to decide. The Hollow King, his past self, stood motionless, waiting. The iron key in Calum's grip felt heavier now, not just metal, but a symbol, a reminder. He had fled once before, erased himself. But was that truly an escape? The whispers of the ruined kingdom surged through his mind, his people's voices lost in time, the echoes of their suffering. He had been their king, and he had abandoned them. Calum exhaled slowly. Then, he did something he never had before. He stepped forward. The Hollow King did not move as Calum reached out, pressing the key against his chest. The moment it touched him, the world shifted. A pulse of light erupted from the throne, rippling through the ruins. The shadows shattered. The weight of forgetting lifted. The Hollow King began to fade. Calum felt it then, the memories returning. The warmth of sunlight on the palace walls. The sound of laughter in the market streets. The scent of the gardens. The way the banners had once flown proudly in the wind. His people had loved him, and he had failed them. But now, he would not run again. As the last traces of the Hollow King dissolved, the throne stood empty once more. Calum turned toward it. He took a breath, and he sat down. The kingdom was no longer hollow. It was waiting, and this time, he would not abandon it.